we'll just give it another minute or so for Senator Lesser to join.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Sorry to get
Good
started
morning.
a few minutes late. We had some number of events and whatnot this morning. In fact, I just saw Allison and Maureen a few minutes ago in person. But it's great to be with all of you and wishing everyone happy holidays. I'd like to call to order the Elderly Nutrition Task Force. Now, it had been our intention to finalize recommendations at this meeting. However, due to the late arrival of the ADS responses, I am not sure if we're going to be able to do that today. It might make sense to schedule one additional meeting for us to have further conversations with all of the task force members and with ADS. But let's see how things go today, see if we can reach some level of agreement. But assuming that that's probably a little too ambitious for this morning, I think it's more likely that we're gonna schedule another meeting at the end of the meeting today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Representative Gilchrist. Do you have any opening remarks?
Nope, just looking forward to the meeting and happy holidays to all. Just I guess, yes, one thing, we are on CTN today, just for folks to know.
Well, glad I dressed up, I guess. Uh, thank you, Representative. Okay. And I don't see our rankings on this morning. So with that, I would love to turn it over to ADS. If you could just walk us through your responses.
Um, And I do just obviously want to remind everybody that these are ADS and OPM responses to recommendations. We are not making any recommendations. That obviously comes out of the task force. So, okay. In terms of, oh, thanks, Chandra. In terms of the first, to realign the state funding, to release a minimum of 80% of the prior year federal contribution, as we discussed, and some of the things that are highlighted in blue are things that came out of the nutrition task force. I'm sorry, the nutrition report, the legislative nutrition report that came out a couple months ago. So that first piece just sort of explains the federal funding flow, and then again, the providing a loan equal to 80% of the federal allocation does go beyond ADS's authority and budget and would have to be approved at a higher level. So our response to that is obviously that we would, that's really a question for OPM or the legislature. So that's sort of our response to that. Number two, we do continue to let our regional administrator at ACL know about everything that's going on in the state, any funding issues, any issues with the program, and trends that we're seeing. So we do obviously always let them know that funding is a concern, and that need outstrips our funding, and that's always communicated to them. Okay, in terms of the next piece, again, this has to do with our funding from ACL. It comes directly from ACL in a set amount, And then looking at the Connecticut Home Care Program for Elders, it's a different agency. That's a DSS program, so we can't really speak to their reimbursement. And we do know that the elderly nutrition providers and the AAAs continue to advocate for increased reimbursement rates through the Medicaid and CHCPE fee schedule. In terms of the Form 5, we are aware that there are concerns about the Form 5 and the amount of information that's being requested. A lot of that information is required as part of the state performance report that we provide for ACL at the end of every federal fiscal year. But we are open to having a conversation with both AAAs and ENPs about sections of the Form 5 that might be able to be streamlined. And we do look forward to potentially doing that in the new year, having a working group for that. And I do just want to mention again that changes to the Form 5 and data collection are not just a nutrition issue. The Form 5 is used for all Older Americans Act funded, or the majority of Older Americans Act funded programs. So any changes to that would impact other programs as well as the nutrition program. 5. Okay, and Chandra, if you could keep going. Number 5 is just, it's not a recommendation as much as just Canas talking about the issues with the nutrition program and funding. So that's noted. Okay, distributing the funds, we had discussed that in a prior meeting and a prior recommendation or report, I'm sorry. Recommendation number 2, ADS does support timely execution of contracts. We will continue to work with the area agencies on aging as part of monitoring. Number 3, this is again the Form 5, so that was encompassed in another response. In terms of ENP staff entering Form 5 information directly into Grantee Gateway, at this time, Grantee Gateway is not a specific MIS system of ADS. We use WellSky Aging and Disability Services, and to change that program would require research and a competitive procurement process. We do have some ENPs that enter their data directly into the state database, which is WellSky AMD. So again, as we discuss the Form 5, as we discuss data collection, we can certainly have discussions about that. Right now, WellSky AMD is the controlling system of ADS for data collection. State Union on Aging issues direct contracts with EMPs. That is not possible due to the Older Americans Act and how it's set up. The Older Americans Act directly says that funds are allocated by the State Union on Aging to area agencies on aging in each planning and service area, and then they in turn contract with elderly nutrition providers. Recommendation number 6, an external auditor or consulting firm. ADS opposes the hiring of any consultants due to cost, and that we obviously will continue to look at what efficiencies can be created. Some of that may come out of this task force, some of it could come out of the nutrition services stakeholder meetings. So we will continue to explore opportunities for streamlining. At this time, however, ADS cannot support the hiring of any consultants. Issue an initial payment by leveraging state funds at the beginning of the program year. The funding allocation schedule for state funds is a quarterly basis, and that is in contract, and that is a directive of OPM. So a change to that schedule would require approval beyond ADS authority. Recommendation number 2, allow for funds to be requested at 25% expended rather than the current 75%. ADS has recommended amending contracts to allow for funds to be requested at 50% rather than 75%. It is going through the system right now, but it does obviously, it's pending commissioner and AG approval. Recommendation number 3, payments must be issued no greater than 30 days after a monthly reporting cycle ends. This was a little bit unclear as to whether this was intended for the AAAs or for ADS. For ADS, obviously, there are pieces that the ENP needs to give to the AAA needs to do on their end. before they in turn can submit expenditure reports and payment requests to ADS. So 30 days after a monthly reporting cycle ends, for an EMP, the ADS would not be able to issue payment within those 30 days. So was not totally clear on that. The RFP process include at least 2 members of the review panel who have direct experience in operating elder nutrition programming and or food service distribution. It does have to be a competitive procurement process, but the composition of review panels is at the discretion of the AAAs. The AAAs, I know, do look for people to have familiarity with the programs and or with the AAA structure. And given the relatively small number of in-state elderly nutrition providers, it may not be feasible to have representatives that have actually operated an elderly nutrition program. Ensure that there's uniformity and training across all AAA regions on the scoring evaluation tool. The AAAs do use the same scoring tool. Ensure that the state aging office reviews and signs off on the procurement process. The ADS does review the draft request for proposal, make sure that it comports with the Connecticut state regulations for competitive process. And in the event that a bidder for an RFP believes that the process was not properly followed, after appealing to the AAA, they may appeal to the State Unit on Aging. So there is a process in place for review of those bids. Recommendation 4 and 5 be combined. Maximize buying power. Maximize buying power of EMPs through a discounted fuel rate and or raw food rate. It is permissible and encouraged that programs engage in cooperative or bulk purchasing within their contract guidelines. Convene a meeting of Connecticut's federal delegation to understand how OA funding comes to Connecticut. We can't make a recommendation about engaging with Congress. However, AAAs and local providers are certainly free to advocate at any level of government for their needs as they see fit. Request an increase to Older Americans Act funding that is sufficient to meet the unit costs of EMP provider agencies in Connecticut. Again, this comes down to ACL and the funding that they allocate to each state. They use their own formula to determine how much each state is going to get, and in fact, the exact amounts for each title section that the state receives. So we did mention that we continue to let ACL know about our needs with our regional administrator. I know that a lot of the EMPs do advocate either through relationships with NANASC or Meals on Wheels America for increased funding. Recommendation number 3, ensure that state funding to support EMPs being leveraged to maximize federal reimbursement. We do use state funds as a partial match for Older Americans Act funding. And the state nutrition funds are allocated in one amount as opposed to being broken down into congregate and home delivered meals like the Title III funding is. It's one amount that can then be used for either of those programs. Okay. The first one we did address in a previous response about the Form 5. Number 2, again, we're going to be looking at the Form 5 data with the work, or we are willing to discuss that with the work group. Sandra, if you could keep going, please. AAAs can enter data directly into the core system or submit directly to finance. ADS responses that provider payment requests have to be reviewed by the AAA field rep to check against expenditure reports for completeness and accuracy, and those required checks and balances in the accounting processes are intended to prevent errors and fraud. Number 4, that was the 25 to 75 was addressed, that we have requested a reduction in the amount so that funds can be requested at 50% rather than 75% expenditures. And that is pending commissioner and AG approval. And we do continue to work on minimizing or reducing, I'm sorry, the timeline of payments to be more timely. Number 5, Connecticut Home Care Program for Elders. Again, that is a DSS program, and it's reimbursed in accordance with the DSS fee schedule, so we can't speak to the actual reimbursement. Number 6, other food security options for seniors could be explored to decrease pressure on the EMP program to provide more than 1 meal per day. ADS certainly supports that. We are aware that there is insufficient funding to serve everybody who might otherwise be eligible, and certainly do encourage exploration of other options. This is a not a recommendation. This is a piece from the nutrition report for the legislature. And there are states where SNAP can be used for Meals on Wheels or for a restaurant program under the congregate program. So those are certainly, things that the state may want to look at to supplement some of the Older Americans Act funding and to supplement meals for older adults. Alternate sources of funding for meals. Again, the Older Americans Act is intended to be a payer of last resort. So if there are other options, it's certainly worth exploring those options and alternate sources of funding until the governor's budget is presented in February and policy priorities and funding levels can be determined. We're unable to support any potential budgetary increase at this time. I believe that's it. That's just an example of the last section of the Form 5 that has some malnutrition questions. That is a piece that is not actually part of the state performance report. So that might be one area where we can look at modifying or doing something different with the data that's collected. Is it for me? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That's a lot to digest. And can you I want to open it up to the members in a second, but just with respect to the possibility of maximizing SNAP with the restaurant meals program option and whatnot, has that been explored previously? And we have not done that?
In the state, not so far. There are other states that do it, and there are options to use SNAP for Meals on Wheels or the restaurant program. It's permissible with SNAP guidelines federally. I don't know about if there are any other state guidelines around SNAP that would prevent that, and I don't believe we've looked at it so far.
Well, that seems like the lowest hanging fruit to get more money into the program ASAP. I'm sure, I don't know if other members have thoughts on that, if that's something that you have looked at or heard from your partners in other states, is whether or not that makes sense or not. No? Okay. Don't everybody raise your hand. All right. So do you want to, in terms of the Form 5, I would really hate to have a task force to recommend another task force. It seems like everyone is of the same mind that we need to streamline the Form 5. How can we do so expeditiously? And I assume that doesn't, well, I guess one question I have is there anything on the Form 5, any of the data that's collected? Most of it is required by federal law, but is there anything that's required by state law that we might need to have a state law change that you're aware of?
Not by state law, no.
Okay, so you could do that administratively on your own. And there's and similarly, there are no regulations either that prescribe those questions. It's just sort of internal ADS policy.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess the question to you, Aaron, and to other folks who want changes to it is, how can we speed up that conversation as quickly as possible to figure out what you really care about, if there are questions that we can remove, if that's one easy way to make things a little easier for this whole process?
I think, from my perspective, having not a task force, but just a small working group of the people who are actually using the Form 5 to see what's not working and see what can be streamlined is the most expeditious way of doing it.
And how quickly do you think you can formulate it, to the extent that you could report back to us by our next meeting? Do you think that there's a chance to have those conversations? I know, we've got some holidays coming up. I want to be mindful of that, but I just think it's important that we move quickly on this. And I also want to show the members of this task force that we have real deliverables, that these meetings haven't been for the sake of another working group.
Sure. I think we can certainly work on getting everybody together. Whether or not we can have changes implemented by the next meeting, I'm not sure, but I will certainly work on getting folks together, and anybody that wants to be part of that conversation, please just reach out to me and we can try to schedule something as soon as possible.
So Representative Gilchrist and I learned yesterday, apparently, that for once due to funding pressures on the LIHEAP program, they're actually not doing the 80% the carry forward this year. They're not able to do that, but that model was something that is something that is still attractive to us. I know you've had conversations with OPM about feasibility. What would it take? I don't know how LIHEAP switched over to that and now how they're going to get back to that once funding improves, but what would it take to do something along those lines? Would it require a 1-year haircut? What would exactly, did you look at potential options for what, how we could structure that financially?
We're uncertain as to how OPM would want to do that if it was possible. With funding being so constrained as it is, I'm not sure that it's possible. It would be possible for anybody to cut any sort of funding for 1 year to carry into the next year, as utilize pretty much all of the funding that's available.
Okay. And if it were, what's the? I should know this. What's the overall size of the programs that you administer, those elderly nutrition programs?
For elderly nutrition specifically, or for all of Older Americans Act programs?
All Older Americans Act programs.
If you give me 1 second, I can pull that up for you.
And the reason I'm asking is just to sort of getting a sense of what, if we needed to make a one-time ask of OPM, what that would likely look like.
So Older Americans Act funding is about $17 million per year for all Older Americans Act titles and sections. Again, that's not just nutrition.
Well, if we found some unused, unspent ARPA dollars or other one-time sources, perhaps that could be useful in conversations with OPM to restructure that. Again, without them here, it's hard to know, but I think we should continue. My personal view, and we'll have to see, is that should be something that we consider as a recommendation. I will now. I could go through your recommendations one by one, but rather than do that, I'd like to turn it over to the subject matter experts and members of the task force to see if you have questions for ADS or you have comments. Just reviewing their responses, and I know that we had hoped to hear sooner, but in interdepartmental conversations, it took a little bit longer than ADS had hoped.
I have a few things just to quickly jump, if that's so to the 80%, so a recommendation, like we could move forward and just recommend that you all work with OPM to figure out how to structure it, right? Where we ensure that the money gets to folks, similar to, okay, so that would be, one of the questions I have is this piece, and I think this is what you're talking about when you're saying you would do a smaller working group with the Form 5, but when you spoke to, ENPs currently entering their data directly into the state database versus the WellSky, who does that? Who does that already? Who already enters it directly into the state database? Or will that be part of that conversation on the Form 5?
No, there is one region where the elderly nutrition providers do the data entry themselves.
Is anyone
Into
in this group from that who could share if that's working well? No? Because that'd be helpful to know, like, if that's the best model, is there a way we could ensure? But I guess then to the folks doing the work on here, would that not work with what you currently have in place to enter it directly? Would that add more work for you because you have a different database that you have to use? Like, just trying to understand, would it be best to just streamline it where you enter the data directly into the state database?
And I think I can speak on the new opportunities front. It would be additional work, but that our staff would be able to do. I think the question is, with this one region, is the EMP being compensated for this additional work? Because obviously the AAAs are getting compensated as part of their compensation. They do this work right now. So I think that would be in talking with my staff here, it's definitely something that could happen if available.
Marie, I saw you. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I think when we talk about compensation for the data entry, the ENPs currently have to enter data. They may do it on paper, but they still have to complete that Form 5, and those paper documents still have to either be entered into WellSky or submitted to the AAA for entry into WellSky. So I think in either case, what we are looking for, Representative Gilchrist, is a way of streamlining it. WellSky is not a very intuitive system. It is difficult for people to use. It does not produce reports the way that would be most advantageous to people reviewing it. And after the information is entered, it is the responsibility of the AAA to confirm the information, make sure people are eligible, make sure the correct number of units are assigned. It's very easy to make mistakes. And of course, that could result in federal audit issues. So that's where the responsibility comes in. We are looking at a system, an interface that sits before WellSky, where the ENP can enter everything, including the Form 5 information. So it would not be an additional requirement. It would be in the place of the paper instead of writing it all down on paper. As you can imagine, when you get these paper copies, there are misspellings, handwriting, interpretations. There are a lot of issues that come up because we are still using such an antiquated system. And they're doing this at the lunch sites of many of the senior centers. So quite often they have volunteers, older volunteers, who are doing all of that paperwork, making it even more complex to keep the information current and accurate. We did apply to OPM through a grant opportunity. We'll be hearing back in January. That might allow some interface system, something much simpler, where people are going into a portal very much like you go into your bank portal, and you're putting in structured data, the client's name, address, the birth demographic, and completing the questions that are on the Form 5, hopefully a streamlined Form 5 that Erin's going to help us achieve, and then telling us how many meals that person received. That will allow the AAA to gather that data, confirm that it is accurate, and use a file transfer protocol to move it from that intermediary system into the required WellSky system. That is what the State Unit on Aging currently requires. It will also allow us to give you a much deeper level of reporting than what the WellSky system requires. So we are hoping to be successful in getting that funding for January. We're going to do a very quick turnaround so that all the AAAs can offer it to all of the ENPs, which will greatly improve the processing time, which allows us to more quickly pay them. It's really one of those circular issues. If I don't get their data until 30 days after their month ends, I can't even begin to process the paperwork and get them paid. So using this intermediary system will allow us to expedite funding to the ENPs. However, that does not change anything that here we are, December 19th, and we do not have a federal contract for meals that are being paid by the ENPs starting October 1. They're paying their vendors, their food vendors for meals. They're paying their staff and their gasoline. And we have no contract in place and therefore no money from the State Unit on Aging for meals that have been served to clients starting October 1st until today. So it does all come back to, you know, everything we're doing is helpful. However, I will be out of money because there is some carryover. You don't spend every single penny, at least we didn't this year. People get sick, they fall off the program. You have some money that carries into the next year, but I will be all out of that money in December, and come January, I will have no money to pay my ENPs, nor will my colleagues, and we will be right back to where those issues that brought us to the task force today.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful. So it's positive that that work is taking place. Here are you on the money. While you don't have the contract still in place, you are still collecting all that data.
Yes, that's part of the requirement. And the ENPs are still paying their vendors. So I hear them, and it's a bad situation.
And then my final question based on the feedback to the recommendation to you all is this piece about the 50%. You know, right now you have to spend 75%. What do you all think about the 50%? I know would that be more helpful? Is that still going to be an issue? Just want to.
It's much more helpful. I think it will work providing the State Unit on Aging stays true to the 45 days turnover, you know, to process a payment to us. Right now, it's much closer to 60 days. It does not work. If they go 60 days, I'm still going to be late with payments to my ENPs. If they can stay true to the 45 days as written in the contract, so that when I put in my request for funds, assuming it's accurate and correct, they will pay me in 45 days. If they can stay true to that schedule, I will be able to pay my ENP within 30 days from the end of the month that they're submitting the data for. So the November 30th, I should be paying by December 30th. And I can do that as long as we are allowed to ask money by 50% at 50% utilization, and as long as the State Unit on Aging actually pays us in 45 days.
So the contract currently says 45 days, but
Correct.
but you often receive it how far?
About 60 days, sometimes longer.
And so the recommendation we had put to discuss was 30 days, correct?
I don't think
I'm
so.
seeing in this document.
The 30 days is in reference to when the AAA pays the ENP. So in that example, November 30th, I need to pay them by December 30th. And as long as the State Unit on Aging is paying me in a cadence within that 45 days, I can pay the ENP. Again, the problem will be that they have no contract on the federal side, so they will not be paying me within 45 days. Right now, or history tells us, they will not pay us on that contract until the federal government has a budget. That budget is allocated to the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut spends some time putting it through a formula to allocate it to the 5 AAAs. So they're, you know, 2 separate issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Other questions from members or feedback, just any other thoughts on the ADS recommendations or things that we should be following up on?
I was just gonna add that the 50% would be a good step, but I think the 25 is really where really allows us to meet what Marie just talked about. I think that getting to that 25% is really the pathway to try to position for success. The 50% obviously would be a good step. I'm not sure where, Aaron, if that is already been approved by the commissioner and is waiting with OPM, or where it stands in the process, if it's just being reviewed or already been approved. But I mean, I think that the 25% is really the landing spot, that I think ensures us, gets us to where, at least closer to where we want to be.
Did you want me to respond to that, Senator?
Sure.
So 50% is where it's going to be for now. Because the 75% came out of an audit finding, ADS is not ready to reduce it more than 50%. We would like to try this, see how it works. That was the amount that basically was approved to go into a contract amendment, was the 50%.
Any comments from other members?
I have a comment, Senator. I would like for us to revisit what the goals of this task force were from the beginning, to see whether or not we've accomplished those goals. I just got these recommendations yesterday at 3:24, so I haven't been able to take a deep dive into whether they are responses to what we've asked specifically. I know that one of the issues that we've talked about was, creating efficiencies. And that I'd like to really take another look at, whether or not we're able to create efficiencies. I mean, right now I'm looking at my numbers and we're talking about payments. I still have a $429,000 outstanding from the last fiscal year. And I'm into the next fiscal year, which right now I have $632,000 that has been expended, for a total of $1,061,000 that I'm carrying. So there are efficiencies to be had here that I don't know that we've addressed. So I really want to take a look at what the goals were, whether or not, with the recommendations or the questions that we have and the responses that we've gotten, whether or not we've achieved that, or whether or not we got anywhere near what we can do better moving forward.
I think that's a great idea. Where do we have, can we pull up the original?
Chandra has it. Yeah, Chandra, could you do your magic? Okay, so eligibility requirements for the program, types of meals provided, costs of the meal prep and delivery, numbers of participants in the program compared to the estimated number of persons in need of nutritional services, adequacy of funding levels, the process for contracting with providers of elderly nutrition services. So we have covered 5 and 6 in some detail, although I don't think we have resolved either of them, but we do have at least quite a bit of conversation. And now the first 4. Well, Lena, what do you think? Have we
Well, I think, I mean, I really think that one of the issues that I've had, I think that the other providers have, is creating the efficiencies and seeing if we can streamline somehow the operation so that we can get paid in a timely basis, receive economies of scale and other types of even procurement and things like that. I don't know that we've gotten there at all. I mean, we're talking about the Form 5. My question about the Form 5 is, how is that data even utilized? What do we use the Form 5 for? The data that we collect in the Form 5.
Karen?
I mean,
So that,
The ADS responses say it could be used in, for identifying malnutrition in seniors or some other stuff there. Can you just sort of walk us through?
but is it used? The question is it used? Is it really looked at Do we look at the data? Do we analyze the data? Do we compile the data on an annual basis and do any kind of analysis on it? Are there allocations that are redirected based on the data that's provided in the Form 5?
The majority of the Form 5 corresponds directly with the state performance report, which is the report that the State Unit on Aging files every year to the Administration for Community Living. So that we have to report on how many consumers there were, how many meals were provided, how many of the consumers were in poverty, were at high risk of institutionalization, are at high nutrition risk. So it all speaks for the majority of the Form 5, it all speaks directly to those questions. So we report that every year to ACL. ACL, I know, does look at the data to ensure that states are meeting the requirements that they're supposed to meet, but they are targeting the target populations under Older Americans Act, those who are at highest social need or highest economic need. So that does all get compiled every year to go to ACL. In terms of the final section of the Form 5, which is the service indicators, the idea behind that section was to look at malnutrition data to determine if people are, or consumers are malnourished, if they are at higher risk, and also to be utilized to create a prioritization scale in the event that a program had to institute a wait list. But other than that section, every other section is reported to ACL as part of the state performance report.
In terms of establishing a wait list, is that something that you've done or had to do?
I mean, there are programs that have had to go onto wait lists. As we all know, the funding is not equal to what the need is. There is not at this time a mechanism to use that last section to easily create a prioritization. It can be looked at to determine if somebody is at higher risk, but there is not a report that can be pulled to show that. So it's more of a manual process.
So can I ask, has the state ever utilized the data that's in the Form 5, compiled it, and made a different determination in terms of allocation of funding or any kind of changes to the program based on that information?
Allocation of funding comes down to the interstate funding formula, which is based on population. So,
but 50% of the funding that comes in from the federal government is supposed to be reviewed based on certain needs, demographics in the communities, right? So it was disabled people in poverty, that 50%. Was there any data that's utilized from the Form 5 to be able to make a different determination?
No, because the IFF, or the interstate funding formula, uses census data, because rather than looking at basically what we're trying to do is look at the population in each region, determine the population in each region that is at highest risk, and make the allocations based on that. So if you simply look at service levels and the consumers that are being served, if the target populations are not being targeted, then you're not getting the picture that you're getting if you use the census data.
When waitlists have been established, have you used the Form 5 data?
Now, I'm not to my knowledge. A AAA would be in a better place to speak to that.
We do, Senator Lesser. I use the risk scores. When a waiting list is established, we use the risk score to prioritize the next person receiving meals. So as someone drops off, the next person would come on. It would be based on those risk scores. Now, there are multiple assessments within the Form 5, and I think that's what we're talking about when we say, can we streamline the Form 5? Once you've established nutritional risk, you really do not need to go on to ask 10 more questions about whether or not they have access to food. You've already established that nutritional risk through the assessment. So yes, at the regional level, we do use those numbers when there is a waiting list. That's the only way that we're able to prioritize who would get the meals next if we're in a negative funding position.
Lena, I'm sorry, I asked my question, but I don't know if you were done yet, if you had other questions.
No, no, I'm fine. I'm just wondering, I mean, with collecting this data, I know that the data is important because the census data is already outdated. Do we actually utilize that data for any particular purpose?
I would say, Lena, without the data, we would not be eligible for federal funding. The data is a requirement of the Administration on Community Living. I'm 100% behind you in your effort to streamline it and to ask the questions that we can use. That is our the AAA's motivation to creating Grantee Gateway, so that we have data that we can actually analyze and use to support health outcomes, to get people enrolled in SNAP, to look at other opportunities, whether they're eligible for the Connecticut Home Care Program. We do not have that with the current WellSky system, and we're hoping that we can do that. But without that data, those minimal data sets that are required by ACL, the state would not be eligible for the federal funding.
And that data is also used to look at whether regions are serving the target populations rather than just a first come, first serve sort of thing. So we can look at the data and see this region, 80% of their participants are at high nutrition risk. So we know that they're really reaching out and getting those populations. Or they're, a region has 10% of folks are, at greatest economic risk. We know that maybe there needs to be some adjustments to how targeting is done in those areas.
Well, I think what we
Thank
want to
you.
do, I think what we want to do is as before, encourage you, Aaron, to have those conversations expeditiously to see if we can streamline that and where we can, reduce the paperwork burden if we can't eliminate it. So I guess I'm still confused about the core CT question that, yes, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on Lena's original request, and you had talked about 1 through 4. I think we talked about that the first meeting, and we kind of established how we get it, why it costs more, and all those things. So I think 1 through 4 didn't really require a recommendation, so to speak. They're not up, so I can't address them directly. Not that that would make a difference, but I think on all those things, we did talk about them. The cost, who gets it, that there wasn't enough funding and those kind of things. So I think as far as those 4 items, we didn't really need to make a recommendation because we all agree on those things. We talked about them. They're the root of the problem for the money and the lack of money. And then ultimately, we can streamline it all we want, but if we don't find a vehicle for the state to front the federal money that we can't control how we get it, it's all kind of just smoke. I mean, we can get the efficiencies and we can do that, but if there's no money there to give to the state unit, to give to the AAAs, it can be as fast as possible. And at some point, like Marie brought up, she's out of money in December. So even if we were as fast as we could be, it would help, but we don't have the money and there's a giant gap there. So, for me as an EMP, I'm just sitting here saying, okay, if we had a system like the Connecticut Home Care Program where we go into the portal and we download all the MIS and it comes in 2 weeks, there's still no money there to pay us. So, no matter what we do, it all comes back to money is the issue to get us paid faster, even with that. So, I mean, I'm just trying to make that part of it really clear. We can't control the federal government at all. So while we're working on these wonderful things, and I'm all for, I'm not trying to chip down anything. It really is about having money in an account somewhere that can get reimbursed to the state or whatever in order for them to even be able to give it to us. So I just wanted to just try to dumb that all the way down, that it's money, 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 no matter what we do, in a timely fashion. We can get as fast as we want, and it's not there.
So Joel,
Joel.
I really appreciate that. I just wanted to jump in here for a minute because we keep referring to the federal government. And I keep saying that there is efficiencies to be had here because this is the end of the fiscal year. I'm into the new fiscal year. And I have an outstanding payment of $429,000 from August and September. This has nothing to do with the federal government. It has to do with what's going on internally between our systems, whether it's core, whether it's the SUA, or whether it's the AAA. There is some inefficiencies or arduous tasks that are going on here that is not allowing the provider to get paid on a time. And this is not even timely. We're talking August and September. I'm into the next fiscal year. So this is what I'm talking. It's not the federal government. So what I am saying in terms of this task force, and one of the things that I wanted to get out of it is how can I help and work with everyone to create efficiencies in terms of how we streamline these operations so that providers like myself and others can get paid on some timely basis, but certainly not into the next fiscal year, moving in and now starting October and November, still with outstanding dollars, and even from the last fiscal years. So there's something to be had here, is what I'm saying. So I am hoping that we're going to accomplish this somehow by the end of this task force.
Lena, I think a piece of that will be accomplished with the 50%, the change from 75% to 50%. That was a huge issue, as well as delayed payments not meeting that 45-day turnover period as written into the contract. I'm not sure if it's going to be 100%. I know all of the AAAs are working really super hard to make sure that their finance departments can turn these over quickly. But when we had to wait until 75% was paid, we were already behind in a payment before we could even request additional money. So, your specific issue, I can't speak to. I'm not a AAA for you. However, I think that the State Unit on Aging, bringing it down to a 50% request and really holding true to the 45%, which I know Aaron and others are working super hard on, I think that is going to take care of that state issue. And if not, if that 50%, as Bill said, needs to go to 25%, we'll have the data to support it, to go back to the State Unit on Aging and say 50% didn't do it. Based on my math, Bill, it does look like we'll just make it as long as we adhere to the dates, but we definitely need to test it. I think the issue will be taken care of. It's just the 50% hasn't even been executed yet, so it's more of a timing issue.
I could appreciate that, Marie. I really could, and I appreciate your help. But we're talking we're talking into 2 months into the new fiscal year. So this is not a timing issue with money. The money should have been here a long time ago. We're talking about August and September. So I'm just trying to bring light to the fact that we need to take a deep dive into these systems and really look at what's going on and streamline these operations is what we need to do. And I don't know that we've gotten there. I think that I don't know that we've really done that.
Maureen and
I'm
Allison,
happy to help to do that. Happy to do that.
I don't want to go too granular here, but do you agree with Marie that the 50% will resolve Lena's issue, or is there something else that is causing that delay?
I do. I think that is absolutely going to help going forward. I think that Lena's concern and Lena's obvious and valid upset with where she's currently standing is something that is very specific to some of the inner workings of what we as an agency have been dealing with for this past year. So, I am a little bit chagrined that we're taking the taxpayers' time to talk about this and litigate this on CTN. However, I really do appreciate the position that Lena is in. And obviously, we've been partners with our E&Ps for a very long time and have enjoyed, almost 50 years of working together. And this has been an absolutely extraordinary year for many of us. And this has never happened before, and it likely will never happen again. So number one, I do feel as though the efficiencies that this task force has done an incredibly good job of doing a deep dive and identifying the issues that have plagued the system from the beginning, the reimbursement, the availability of cash, the availability of additional options for elderly nutrition programs. Those are going to be three sizable things to come out of this task force. I do believe, again, that with additional communication and a lot of work between partners, we can absolutely address what is currently going on between us and our contractor, but that is not the goal of this particular task force. If you put that list back up, I believe that Joel was right on the money. We needed to talk about eligibility. Who prior to this task force fully understood that we could not deny services to anyone over the age of 60 who needed a meal? Eligibility was a huge question mark for this task force. Quality, all of those pieces 1 through 4, I think we've done a real service to the citizens of Connecticut. This is an incredibly difficult and nuanced conversation that we had to have. It's one that technically we've been having for many years, but as you can see with the layers, it's not an intuitive process, and we really needed to get there. I do believe going forward, the efficiencies that we've identified will absolutely make a difference, but I still need to make the point because I feel like we continue to slip away from it. One of the things that Erin's responses said, Older Americans Act meals are designed to be the payer of last resort, okay? And in Connecticut, I believe that that is actually not the case because those Older Americans Act meals cannot be denied. They are not on the uniform reimbursement schedule. In many cases, they are likely the meal of first resort, and that is absolutely not the intention of those meals. And so until we really look at what the true needs of this state are, how we're going to pay for them, and how we're going to pull more people into the system that the system can afford, I think we're going to continue to have this. But I don't want this task force to feel that no accomplishments have been made. I think we have absolutely made great inroads. But I do think that we need to move forward from what is very clearly and now very publicly a regional issue and move on to the broader culture of what this program needs to do.
Okay, let me just jump in here a quick second because I need to respond to that. This is not a regional issue. This is an issue among all providers. We've been hearing this among all of these providers the entire task force period that we've been here in terms of payment and the timeliness of payment. So this is not a CRT issue. It is a provider issue in general. And Joel could talk to that because all the providers feel that way. So, and when you talk about accomplishments and what we've gotten to, I want to know what those are. Can you share with me what we've accomplished right now in terms of efficiencies? Because what I want to do is really look at what the outcomes are.
I'll jump in because I was going to talk a little bit before. I concurred with a lot of what Maureen and Marie have said on this, but
Sure.
I think that this task force has really brought to light a lot of very important issues. And Lena, your point of timeliness of payments. I mean, I know, because we were working together up until the end of last fiscal year, that was definitely an issue. And I emailed you as soon as I could with that a payment is coming because we were actually waiting for that moment of receipt of payment because of those delayed payments through the State Unit on Aging. And some of mine, I even mentioned it on this program, were exceedingly late. But kudos to the State Unit on Aging for maybe being in the spotlight and having to, get remedies in place to that to getting payments back in line. And what Marie said, if we can stick to that 45 days, we can make that all happen. And I think all of the ENPs, when you have a contract with us, if you're going to be able to get paid on time, it just makes you able to function. And as AAAs, we are in that same boat because we're relying on that cadence of payments. So if nothing else, if this task force helped with that component of it, I think it's a huge win. And I also think that the change of the 75% to the 50% is going to be a tremendous value, even though we're not realizing it right now. We're not living it yet, but we will be soon. The other efficiencies, I think that's a lot of stuff that we can continue to discuss in our stakeholders meetings. I really appreciate the support of Senator Lesser and Representative Gilchrist on this initiative, in that forward funding of the state for this period of time without the federal money, we wouldn't be able to do that in this area. So that support and that interest, I think, is tremendously valuable, and we also, that's still to come. So I appreciate this group getting together. I think we have done a lot of really great work, and I think we have engaged some great conversation, and I think we've expanded the knowledge of what the senior nutrition program is, and kind of reframed things a little bit after the pandemic, where we were doing 2 meals a day, 7 days a week to a lot of people because that was the only way of getting food into their homes. But that's really not the focus of the Older Americans Act funded meals. So we kind of had to reshift our thinking there, because that is what plays into wait lists. If you spent all the money very fast, then you're not going to have money to continue to provide for people as they come on with a need. So we're all looking at how are we planning our spending more appropriately so that we can meet people across the across the year, and planning for what we think will happen across the state. So I think this has been very valuable. There's still more work to do.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all of that, and I think that's helpful. But I am sort of still interested in figuring out what other deliverables are up there. And so somebody mentioned earlier that one, I think Aaron, you mentioned that one is it one AAA uses Core CT, or who uses? Or was it one provider that directly enters into Core CT?
Oh, not Core CT. WellSky Aging and Disability Service. That's our MIS system.
Okay, and so nobody directly enters into Core CT, because that you said that's not possible because of need with the check.
There are some checks and balances associated with the invoices that come in from the area agencies on aging.
Forgive my ignorance, because I've tried to play with Core CT and I'm really bad at it. But is there a way to incorporate checks and balances into Core CT? Can you audit those fine numbers, or just assumed to be perfect?
I honestly can't speak to that. I'm not sure of the answer. I can certainly look into it, but I can't speak to it specifically.
I would jump in on that a little bit, Senator Lesser, that as agencies on aging for other programs, like we manage the MFP, we do participate with Core CT directly, but that's not the same program here.
In that other program, are you subject to? I assume your numbers are still checked in that other program as well. You're subject to an audit and all that. Wouldn't that simplify the administration for everyone?
Yeah, and I wanted we also work with Core CT directly through DSS contracts, and DCF contracts as well, and our monitor, their fiscal units have access as we have access, and monitor that. So there's direct entry.
Okay, so Aaron, based on that, what could we, in terms of that question, is this a question for Best? I'm just not sure who we would.
It's just it's a completely different system for the DSS home care meals. Those all are associated with prior authorizations and procedure codes, and they have a system where you say they get this many meals a week, and here's the procedure code associated with it. Here's the frequency. So that's an automated system, more so than the system that we use, where it will kick out meals that don't comport with the actual procedure codes, prior authorizations, and things like that. So it's a very different system.
Right, but I guess we're hearing some dissatisfaction with the existing system, and so we're looking to see if there's a more efficient way of entering with fewer, and trying to reduce the administrative burden on folks. So are you saying that you don't think Core CT could work, or that it would just require some work to shift over to that?
To change our data system is a big thing. It would be a big change, and it would have to go through all of the regular competitive procurement if we wanted to change the system. So I really can't speak to.
Why would Core CT is sort of essential? It's like
Core CT is not a data collection database. It's a fiscal system. So there's still all of the back end data collection that needs to go on.
Okay. Lena, are you talking to us?
Yeah, I was on mute. Is it the system itself, or is it the processes to get the information into the system? That causes delays.
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Well, I think it's a lot of what Lena's asking to is the delays, which we are discussing, have happened historically to everybody, but I know, at least I can say in my experience, have recently improved. And to that, with talking with the team at State Unit on Aging, is with a focus of making sure that they can meet that 45 days within our contract, so that there aren't those excessive delays. Because if there's delays on their end, then there's a tremendous delay in the AAA's end on being able to pay E&Ps. So it's all about moving the funds when they're needed to be moved. And to the point of last year's fiscal budget being at the state, that needed to move, or when the state budget is available and fully funded, then how do we keep those funding processes moving? So I think that the State Unit on Aging is making efforts to do what they do to make that move forward. And that's different than it was this time last year. So, I think we're trying to look at, has this made improvements, and are we giving opportunity to see those improvements in play?
And I think, to your point, Allison, there's the payment cycle piece, and then there's the data piece, and those are related but also separate. So there might be efficiencies in one place that don't solve the problem in the other place, but and vice versa. So those are the things that we're looking at, is data collection and streamlining there, and then the fiscal processes and streamlining there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm sorry, we're the grantee gateway. What is that? I should know.
Senator Lesser, that's a system that Southwestern Connecticut Agency on Aging created to act as an intermediary to sit between WellSky and the grantees. We created this system because of all of the things Lena is saying. And Lena, in Southwestern Connecticut, all of my E&Ps, all of my providers are on a 30-day receivable. They have not received a late payment in 7 years. So it's not accurate to say that that hasn't happened. It is happening here. And it's happening because we initiated the Grantee Gateway, which allows the grantees or the elderly nutrition providers to enter their data in real time. We shut it down on the 15th of the month following the previous month, and any data that they've put in there, we are able to process by the 30th, so 30-day receivable, and make the payment. Again, we do that month in, month out, except when we have the delay in federal funding, which is going to bring me to December this month. I will be short on my payment. What we have to do as an agency is either go get a line of credit, which costs us money, the interest, to continue to pay our elderly nutrition providers, or to rob Peter to pay Paul, move money from one program into another to try and keep them going. I have done that for 7 years. Last year was the first year that we got to a critical point, and the day before I took a line of credit, the State Unit on Aging was able to release a payment to me and I didn't have to do it. But that explains the processes. These are issues I've shared with my fellow directors. We all understand it. It was expensive for Southwest to create Grantee Gateway. It does not interfere with the federal reporting that is required through the State Unit on Aging. It presents a file that is automatically transferred. And so we meet all of the requirements on the federal side. But we did that because we could see that this was reaching a tipping point. And we knew that if we could not work with our providers to get the information in, we would never be able to get the payments out on time, and we'd never be able to identify where is the real holdup in payments. And again, we have done that. The Aging CT is now working together in a very different way than it was years ago. I am sharing the technology. If given the award through OPM, we will be presenting this technology to all 5. Does not need to go through the same processes because we're not eliminating WellSky. We're just streamlining by creating that file transfer protocol that meets all of their requirements. Our hope long-term would be that maybe the State Unit on Aging would say, wow, the system's so good, we no longer need to deal with WellSky 2, but that's a whole issue down the road for the State Unit on Aging. What we have to do as AAAs, we are nonprofits just like you, is find a way to work within a system that is often very complicated, and puts us at odds with our partners, which is the exact opposite of what the Older Americans Act wants us to do. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and help meet the needs of older adults and reduce the bureaucracy anywhere we can.
And in terms of the making, glad to hear the Grantee Gateway is working for your providers in the Southwest, but is that something that you've made available to the other AAAs for use with their?
I would love to make it available, Senator Lesser, and I will, providing we get the grant funding. There is a cost to taking the source code and implementing it at each of these agencies. There's a cost both in licensing for software through Salesforce. We use a Salesforce-based platform and some other technologies. And there's also a coding cost because we have to then take that technology and give it to all of our grantees so that they can direct enter it. We have requested the grant. We should know from OPM by the end of January, and we will work very quickly to implement it should we be funded.
Okay.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Sure.
We could even, perhaps, I don't know how the OPM grant works, but perhaps we could consider a nudge to them in support of that proposal. All right. We are running short on time, and I do think we should have some additional. We've had some ideas out there. I'm really interested in exploring the SNAP ideas that were mentioned earlier, and I'm going to be having a conversation with DSS immediately after this call to sort of get a sense of whether or not that's feasible. And I'd love your thoughts as well about how, if this is the program of last resort, how we sort of structure things so that we can bring in additional dollars in a way that doesn't turn people away. So I think that's going to be tricky. We'll have to lean on your expertise. Are there other before I don't know that we're gonna be able to settle on a date and time of next meeting without comparing our schedules. I'll be consulting with Representative Gilchrist, and we'll get that out as soon as we can and give you all time to plan around that. But we will.
Excuse me, Chairman?
Yes.
Hi, I haven't figured out how to raise my hand on the telephone yet.
We go right ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to quickly say that we are going to have to explore something new. My mother and I'm 70, my mother's 98, and as you know from having set this up, we have been doing the congregate meals. However, she has had some serious declining in her physical strength. And so we're at the point right now that we need to make that shift over to the residential. So I have a call into Meals on Wheels. I called them yesterday, and we'll see. I don't know if they're on vacation this week, but we'll see what they can do. And I will just let you know how the process works for us in the transition, and maybe that might give you some input as, you know, you're looking at data and different things like that.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm sorry to hear of her physical decline, but wish you the very best. And please let us know how that goes. And if we need to troubleshoot with you, I think we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. So we will be back in touch soon about the date and time of the next meeting. But in the few minutes we have left, are there other issues raised either by Aaron's ADS's responses or that haven't been mentioned that you think we should be considering today for our next meeting for possible recommendations?
Senator, I just wanted to mention that with the SNAP payments, the average payment for an older adult in Connecticut is about $250 for the month. It's not a lot of money. And there is no breakfast served with home delivered meals. And occasionally, you know, someone would like to supplement with a little snack or something. So we do have to, I just want to make sure that that's part of the picture, because taking that $250 and paying, you know, $8, approximately $8 a meal, that would leave them with without the ability to get some cold cuts or some breakfast in their home.
So, but I guess the question is, if SNAP enrollment is really low for older folks, which is what we've heard, wouldn't right now, if they're not getting anything, if we can get the providers in the game of assisting with SNAP enrollment, wouldn't that, just from a 30,000 foot level, it seems like a good way to bring additional money, additional resources into the picture. And obviously that $250 may not be enough if it's being spent on, you know, home delivered meals or congregate meals to cover you for the whole month, but it could bring some additional money into the picture. And if folks are, you know, financially stressed, they should be on SNAP anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's there are barriers because, you know, so much of the information is online, and for older adults that may present a barrier for understanding SNAP and how to enroll in it. So any efforts we could do to increase SNAP would be much appreciated. I just wanted to balance it that for those people with Meals on Wheels, SNAP benefits may not be the alternative. It may be part of the puzzle.
Right. No, it's a way of bringing in some additional revenue. That's sort of what I was thinking. In just from my own edification, do any of you currently do in-person SNAP enrollments? Is that something that is currently happening?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Yes.
We do it. CAP agencies do it.
Well, do you see a barrier to sort of front loading when someone enrolls in or presents at a congregate meal site or enrolls in Meals on Wheels to do a SNAP screen? I know we're talking about making forms simpler. This is making them more complicated. I just want to see if there's a reason. Do we do that currently? And if not, should we do that?
We should do more of it. We do it on a catch as catch can basis, but there's not the funding for staffing. That's probably something that we should be out at the congregate site on a somewhat regular cadence, doing enrollments for SNAP, but we have unfortunately limited staff and a lot of bureaucratic stuff to do. So,
and for home delivery meals, does that happen?
We reach
Same
out to all
situation.
New Start home delivered meals people as well, but it's kind of like the offer is there if they want to call in for assistance and help. So we kind of rely on them reaching back out to us, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does, but we actually had a lot of more people sign up for SNAP because of connecting with them with the Senior Farmers Market nutrition program this summer, which was really great. And I know we had a little bit of involvement with them. So it's multi-pronged approach to making that happen. Definitely a lot of gains in SNAP, doing home delivered, or, you know, that you can use SNAP funds in home delivered arenas, not paying for the service, but people can shop that way, because our home delivered folks have trouble getting out to get the groceries.
Actually, it's a really good question, Senator, and I think that Bill and I could take a little bit of a deep dive in there and see how many of our participants in the Meals on Wheels program are actually on SNAP as well. So we can actually provide those numbers to you, because I think that would be a good exercise. And if we have to do more of that at the centers, at the congregate sites and all, we can do that. But yeah, we can provide those numbers.
Yeah, I would agree, because, you know, we do it because, you know, we engage our Meals on Wheels participants for fuel assistance, housing assistance, and other
Mhm.
needs. So we could definitely be able to gather that data to see, you know, what kind of gaps exist. And to Lena's point, I think what was mentioned about doing something routine, you know, is critical, because there are a lot, you know, with the elder population, that the online portal is not, you know, not the best option. It's an
Yeah.
option, but not the best.
Anything else for the good of the order? Anything else that we should be considering at our next meeting, which will be the meeting to finalize recommendations?
Well, I think we can all support Marie's application to OPM.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, I want to wish everybody a happy holidays and a wonderful new year, assuming we will likely schedule the next meeting sometime in January. And want to thank everyone for their thoughtful comments, and hope we are moving expeditiously towards recommendations. So thank everybody, and I'll see you likely in the new year.
Okay. Happy holidays,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy holidays.